Good afternoon. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. This is Paul Bass inviting you to look behind the headlines and the stories that make our community tick. Well, the election is making us tick, and yes, there is an election next Tuesday, November 4th. We do have races for mayor and a bunch of alders, and one of the alders who's running for re-election and has an opponent is here in our studio today. Welcome back to WNHH-FM, Darryl Brackeen Jr.
Yeah, it's so great to be back. It feels like home.
So I forget to say junior sometimes, but you like to have the junior, right?
It's all right. I love my dad.
Is he still around?
Yes, that's right.
What does dad do?
He's actually working for nursing homes, home care aide.
And are you the first in your family to get involved in politics?
Well, if it wasn't for him, the union bug, actually he was a union steward for SEIU 1199. So they always say I was kind of born on a picket line. So
I've always felt that unions are a great way to nurture talent for politics. Like you think how we get too few people running for office getting involved in politics. And there's something about, I think, doing those day-to-day campaigns, knocking on doors for a union, learning how to compromise with other people, how it takes a whole group to get something across the finish line. The kind of, I think that's what happened in 2011. We got all these people. Yes. You weren't the only one first elected. Or I guess you were first elected in 2013.
2013.
But, we had this whole group in the last decade who came out of the labor movement. And everyone thought it was a labor conspiracy, which I actually thought it wasn't, because they weren't, like there was no relationship with the teachers union, no relationship with the ministers union. What it more was that's where the talent was found.
That's right.
It's kind of interesting. I don't know. Have you found that? Do you find when you deal with them, does it feel like a union meeting or anything?
No, it feels like community. This is actually like I said, I was basically born on the picket line, they always say. And for me, the collective is always the power behind the working middle class. Without the unions, there wouldn't be a middle class, quite literally. I always often like to actually acknowledge, I'm glad you mentioned my dad. I'd like to also shout out my mom, too.
Tell me about your mom.
Yeah, so they actually migrated up from the state of Georgia back in the early 90s. And they often tell of their experience of coming to New Haven, and actually on their first day of arriving, they were basically homeless. They actually slept on a park bench on Gulf Street Park. So we often go back there to reflect, and it's amazing how over the years Gospel Fest was held there. So like we'd always kind of reflect on what poverty drove them up north, and my dad actually found a good paying union job. And if
in a nursing home?
Atrium Plaza.
Yeah, I remember that.
Since shut down, but it was a powerhouse. It was a bastion powerhouse in terms of union politics. My dad, worked with the likes of Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, at the corner of Union Hall on College Street.
What year was it when they slept on the bench?
Oh, man. I was born in 88. So between 87 and 88.
Oh, they came up then?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so that's more recent. I was wondering, Jesse Jackson was coming to town then, doing all sorts of stuff.
That's right. Just the timing of it was amazing. In Gulf Street is just a throw of downtown. So looking at all the activism that was happening. So you go
visit there to remember. You still do
Absolutely.
That. Have you taken your kids?
Absolutely. And actually, Alder Marks, who's the alder for that area, she doesn't realize this, but Gulf Street Park, the fact that she's made this like a place, a jewel, it always meant something to me, so I always love to reflect.
She did get the neighborhood back together.
That's right.
Did your mom work too?
Yes, she did. She actually started out a fast food worker who ended up working for Aramark, which was on Wallace Street.
And that was a subcontractor with the city to do cafeteria services, but it was a national group, also did airlines and stuff.
That's right.
Were they union?
They were. But very quickly, my mom, very ambitious, actually jumped into a job training program to become a bank teller at then New Haven Savings Bank.
That had a lot of names to go.
Yeah. And many years through the banking system, she actually ended up being an assistant branch manager well over 20 years, even through all the transitions. She actually recently retired.
All right.
Yes.
And now their son, Darryl Brackeen, is the alder from Ward 27.
That's 26.
26, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. And what I love about that ward is it's not only Upper Westville, but it's Beverly Hills.
Yes.
And people don't know there's a neighborhood in New Haven called Beverly Hills.
That's right.
But it doesn't feel like the one we read about in the movies. It's more kind of like working middle class, wouldn't you say?
That is absolutely
It's a nice neighborhood, though.
It is.
I'd rather live there than the other one.
Right. And actually, back in the day, it was really where the starter homes were considered. And then you'd come to the other side of Fountain Street towards Ray Road, Stevenson Road, I always call it Preacher's Road. All the pastors live there, but yeah. So, and you just kind of make your rounds, and you kind of move around in the neighborhood. Many people in the neighborhood, well over 30 years. Many of the families living there. So
Darryl, you're running for a 5th 2-year term.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, the first thing is that the community asked me to. So that's like a huge honor and privilege. As time goes on, and almost 8 years later, which is really hard to believe, like starting out as a 21-year-old kid, having lost my first race, came back, ran again through the collaboration and the leadership of my 2 ward co-chairs, Amy Marks and Dr. Sharon Jones McCann.
That's a real team there.
Yes.
Because, it's a racially diverse ward.
Yes.
Fair to say.
Yep.
They've made a real point. It's one of the best ward committees in town because they get out by measure
That's
of
right.
like getting the vote out and really keeping. And what they do interesting is that Sharon and Amy have had that co-chairship for a while, and they really, it's one's black, one's white, but more importantly, they really work together. When they have a different pick for mayor, they are able to work together so well.
Yes.
Sort of as a model for democracy, I would say.
That's right. That's right, Paul. And I often shied away from actually saying how that coalition came together, but I feel like this is a kind of moment. It's a re-election time. I got to talk about, what really brought us together. And I must admit, when I approached them to be the ward leaders, I told them that was my highest priority. This was about coalition building. I didn't want a ward committee that always agreed with me, right? I believe in sharpening and challenging leadership. Actually, that was literally the reason why I originally ran, and they embodied that balance so much so that it's just amazing how it's like a family, right? We definitely fuss and fight. That is an absolute fact, but when it's time to come together and unite, we do that in a uniting front.
So people ask you, so why you run again, but also you got to like the job. So like, why do you want to do the job?
Yeah.
Alder, what do you get, $3,000 a year stipend?
Well, there's taxes.
So what is the stipend?
So I will say it basically comes out to $152 a month.
So in other words, it's way below, not only below minimum wage, it's probably less than $2 an hour.
I mean, it barely pays.
So you're not really
for
paid,
gas.
that's a stipend.
I feel like a super volunteer in many ways because we often
a lot of long nights, a lot of long meetings, a lot of knocking on doors. So why do you do that?
Yeah, it's in my blood. I absolutely love the fact that I'm able to give back to the community that gave so much to me. As I just said, like, if it wasn't for this New Haven community, and in particular the Upper Westville neighborhood, really looking out for us, me, my sisters, now my 2 daughters and my wife, it's a family. It's a family, and I feel like I am more effective now because of the role that I do play as the Health and Human Services chairperson, and the fact that I have a better grasp after 8 years on how to actually get some things done, right? I think I've said before in the past even, many people are just unaware of what an alder really does and what it doesn't do. And the biggest thing that we do, well, I don't want to say it like that, but the biggest thing that we do is be the representative and the voice of the reflection of that, which is why I want to get back to the ward committee just for a second to say that there's 50 members on this ward committee, and they are all very active. They're all required to do certain things and to actually show up and to literally survey their street and the surrounding street that they are on in order to bring back that information to me so that I know what I need to be advocating for at City Hall. Another thing that I want to highlight is, as an alder, it's basically legislative, right? I actually cannot execute. I do not run the administration.
Right, you're not the executive division. You can pass laws. You can scrutinize how the city's being run through hearings, and you also can act as an ombudsman for your neighborhood. People say, I have a problem with trash here. The city screwed up my sidewalk.
That's right.
How do you get on a board or commission?
That's right. But I do not approve, and I cannot direct the departments to actually do the thing. So oftentimes, after 8 years now, the longer you're in the role, the more it's like, well, it appears that you're the problem or someone's the problem. We just need our issues fixed, right? So I try to bring the energy of, look, we've been complaining about certain issues in our neighborhood for quite some time. This is to the administration and a committee called the RAC Committee, which is the Resource Allocation Committee. Which
I love that name. It's like the worst bureaucratic name in the world, but it's such an interesting thing. Tell me if I got it right. I think it started 10 years ago. Everyone always had theories that you needed political pull to get sidewalks fixed and stuff. And there's always some of that in history. Yeah. But partly it's just a lot more sidewalks to get fixed or streets to be paved than there's money. Right. And they set up this committee through the Alders, the most democratic elected body in town, where you got together to figure out which neighborhoods needed most help in which streets, and then you set the priorities as a group. Is that a right way to say it?
I have to actually acknowledge the city town clerk, Michael Smart, who actually paved the way concerning that the inequities.
When he was in Alder, right?
That's right.
But Resource Allocation Committee, terrible name.
It's terrible name, and it unfortunately...
It's not like Big Mac. Like, you don't call that the Resource Allocation Meat Patty, right? We're talking to Darryl Brackeen Jr. He's the Alder from Ward 26, and he's running for re-election on Tuesday, November 4th, and he's here on Dateline New Haven, WNHH FM, New Haven's home for community radio. So, Darryl, you said some kind of interesting. You said I have a better grasp after 8 years at how to get things done. Tell me a story about that.
Sure.
What's something you learned, how you get things done?
Well, let's go to the meat and potatoes. Like, when I first started running, it was really bread and butter issues. It was sidewalks, lighting, and streets. And education came up, but as we know, the Board of Alders doesn't have a direct say over the Board of Education. We can strongly advocate on issues, and also approve the overall budget for the Board of Ed.
The overall city budget, right? You
Correct.
don't approve the overall budget, which is 75% out for side funding.
That's right. So back to the bread and butter issues. There's, like I said, 50 streets in the neighborhood. And actually, at this point, I can safely say 43 out of the 50 streets have had some sort of improvement over the last 6 to 7 years. Now, one thing I want to note is, hey, if I paved the street, one of the first streets I got paved was Vista Terrace and the installation of the speed humps on that street. After 8 years, obviously there's going to be some degradation of the materials that were originally used. So yes, there are, the street needs to be repaved. That is an absolute fact, which means it has to go through the Resource Allocation Committee. So it's my role to recommend what street, what sidewalk, what tree. I forgot about the trees. I always say I'm the alder of the trees. So tree trimming.
Does alder mean tree?
It does. It literally does. So
you're the tree of the trees.
Yep. Actually, it's probably the largest forested award next to East Rock in the city. So we have the Maltby Lakes and
even more than 30. How could that be?
30.
Ward 30 has West Rock. Although I guess maybe I don't know where the town line stops. Where does it become Woodbridge?
It does stop a little earlier than most people think. So Pond Lily Avenue is a bit of that, but of course the West Rock obviously is.
But yeah, you got a lot of woods there.
That's right. So I'm competing.
And some secret streams, right, going under West Prospect.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. That's right. And just really, the process is streets are recommended to the RAC committee. There are 30 wards, right? There are other ways that the Department of Public Works and trees measure which sidewalks and what streets are the priority. I do not make that priority. My priority is to get the street that I believe needs to be paved or addressed or potholes filled onto that list so that the committee, the RAC committee, can approve or delay or, decide on which streets actually need the immediate support, long-term support, or even just like maybe some type of short-term measure. Again, 43 out of the 50 streets over the last 8 years. That also kind of highlights, hey, the bureaucracy that's involved in trying to get something done, it literally takes years. And of course it sounds like, hey, you know what? It's another politician just giving me a bunch of BS and excuses. But I would love to provide like a tour of even, showing the number of documents that I actually have filed in the Board of Alders to show like, hey, look, there's the number of requests that I've literally put in. You can see the follow-up. You can see the great staff in the Office of Legislative Services. So in addition to
constituents, block-by-block issues, you also deal with citywide policies in Alder. You are the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee?
That's right.
How long you've been chairing that?
Well, that Health and Human. Well, it was originally the Human Services Committee that I first joined in my first year. So I served as a general member then, and then maybe 2 years later, I was appointed through the thought of the president, Taisha Walker Myers, as the Human Services Chairperson. It was my mission to actually expand the mission of that committee, and I actually was able to successfully rename it the Health and Human Services Committee.
And why'd you do that?
Because actually we dealt with a lot of healthcare specific legislative issues, and many do not know this, but the jurisdiction of the Community Services Administration oftentimes have grants and programs that they need to run through my committee, and that includes the health department. So the health department is actually within the jurisdiction of the Health and Human Services Committee in terms of... And
in the recent years, it's a bigger deal. One of them was a bigger deal in 2019, the other bigger in 2021. Two of the big issues in town have been health. COVID-19 pandemic, and right before that, lead paint, and we needed to overhaul our system.
Exactly.
So what role did you play in that as the chair of that committee?
Yeah, I actually led the efforts in terms of revising and creating the lead commission as it is right now. Along with the help of Amy Marks, the majority leader, Richard Furlow, who actually got it over the top and did a lot of the negotiations politically. But the issue arose in my committee where we were trying to hold accountable a few employees, I'll leave nameless, in terms of how monies were being spent at the time.
Like, in other words, outreach to people living in poor neighborhoods was once a year that you take a bunch of buses and go to a picnic at Lighthouse Park to learn all about lead paint. Not bad intentions, just kind of like about 40 years out of touch with how the world works.
And it wasn't quite getting to the people who actually needed to resolve the issues, to resolve those issues. So that's actually literally, it was birthed out of my jurisdiction and committee.
So as an Alder role, you can't make the decision, you can't hire the person. You can review it and ask the questions, approve what they're going to do or not approve, and try to influence it.
That is absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And then, of course, fast forward a few years later. Well, actually, we've been successful in getting the lead task force established and building in the accountability system to begin to move forward in the efforts of resolving the lead issues that we see in the city today. Under the jurisdiction of the health director, Maritza Bond, it's my understanding that she's also beginning to seek out additional grants that we have to ultimately approve.
We'll talk about this on another show, but now you're running against her for Secretary of the State.
You know what? To each his own, really. To each his own. And I'm actually, just to clarify, exploring statewide office.
And so is she, yeah.
So, to each his own.
But it's not the governor.
Anyway.
So lead paint was a big issue.
That's right.
And then this little pandemic came across and just changed all of our lives and put us in stop. So how'd that affect you? Okay, your role in this is you're the head of the Health and Human Services Committee. What did you do once the pandemic hit, and what role have you played in New Haven's response to it?
Absolutely. You know what? It actually, well, first of all, the whole world and American society shut down, right? We had to figure out a few hurdles in terms of like the use of technology in actually holding committee hearings.
Remember the first days, more in Hamden, but also New Haven, people were bombing them, putting pornographic images or putting racist messages up.
That's right.
That got under control pretty fast, didn't it?
It did.
The worst cases were Hamden.
Yeah. And you know what's funny about that? It actually, as a millennial who basically grew up with technology at my fingertips, I was like, wait, here's another skill set that I can bring to the board, and suggesting how we can incorporate technology to provide a wider platform for people to actually participate in the process. So for me, that was step one. How do we ensure that when these federal grants come through, which there have been many, come through my committee, that I'm able to show a transparent and fair process in terms of what's coming through, what we need to approve, and who gets the seat at the table. So that's step one. Step two, like I said, any grant that falls within the purview of the Health and Human Services space has to come through my committee, and actually through my approval, to ensure that, first of all, the residents of the city know what's coming into the city. It's transparent in terms of how the funds are going to be allocated and spent. And ultimately, what's going to happen afterwards. So I also stand as an accountability to bring someone back in order to, address, hey, how's the funding?
Daniel Hunt
spent?
says, Alder Brackeen, one of my favorite alders and leaders. Thanks for listening, Daniel. Give me an example of that, please, Darryl. What was the case? Did you bring someone back to say we want more answers? Because obviously the pressure is you want to prove the stuff as best you can, right?
Right.
We're in a pandemic. Every day we're learning something new about what we need to do. We're scrambling to get money so we can get tested and then get vaccines. What healthcare? What was an example where you brought somebody back or you asked a question that hadn't been asked?
Well, it's interesting that you asked. So let me give my little disclaimer to say that I appreciate this platform and the New Haven Independent. You actually highlighted one of those issues. I don't necessarily agree with what the headline said in terms of.
If you ever agree with our headlines, we're closing up because you elected officials are not supposed to agree with our headlines, or else we're in the wrong business.
So for the audience, I love Paul Bass, plain and simple. Let's just be clear about that. I don't agree with the headlines, right? But we are the check and the balance to the executive branch.
I know what you're talking about. Okay.
I would not have been doing my job, the job that I was elected to do and appointed to do with the trust of the president of the Board of Alders, if I just let grants, crucial grants, I might add, just kind of go by the process. There is a process, and as a matter of fact, I ensured that my committee even did double time of meetings to ensure that grants would never be held up in any way, shape, or form.
What was the question you were raising? Because I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, sure.
It's
No,
like
you were asking,
about,
hey, was there an example in which I had to kind of hold someone accountable?
So you said you wanted to make sure you could ask questions without slowing down help, so you scheduled extra meetings, but made sure the questions were asked, but also that the money could be approved in a timely manner.
And legally, we had to ensure that these grants were publicly noted and acknowledged by members of the public.
Right, there's a reason for the process. So what was it? What was the question you asked? And I do apologize, I don't remember.
Yeah, sure. No, well, actually, we didn't even. The committee was not aware of what the spending of the grant was going to be at all. Like it just kind of went over our heads. And it was a learning lesson, and we've all addressed those issues since. As a matter of fact,
well, there's an old story at the Alderman long before you, Darryl.
Yeah.
I mean, alders sometimes feel like there's not a respect of the legislative process, although since there's been a majority coalition on the board of alders, they do get more respect than they used to. But it used to be a big deal. We had a strong mayor system, and before you were on the board, I remember big fights about, like, you didn't bring this before us. And the officials say, we're working so hard, we don't have time, we got to get this plan set. But wait a second, you're spending a lot of money, these are big issues, and we're supposed to go over it. So the officials say, well, you're acting like, big shot when you have no power, but you want to throw your weight around. The other side says, well, if we don't do this, there's no democracy and no oversight.
That's right.
So I think it's actually a healthy tension.
Yes.
Where you have to press them when they have developers who want things from them in a deal, or they have the federal government, which is impossible to deal with, they need paperwork in, that you're saying we have to count too, we have to see the stuff.
Imagine if a grant were to come in, bypass the process, and something horrible happened. Who are you going to hold accountable? You're going to come back to me because I'm the elected representative.
So it sounds from what you were saying that, so what the city might have learned was the need to get the ducks in a row for the oversight. Did you learn anything about scheduling more meetings?
So I know that's been an executive issue for the last 100 years of the city, right? So every mayor I've ever heard just say, hey, look, the aldermanic process sometimes is long and uncumbersome, but the power of the chairs are to also be flexible. So in this time of implementing the technological advances, as well as realizing, like, this grant, we can miss this grant because we regularly schedule our meeting on the fourth Thursday of the month. We have to use we need a reality check. So I feel like I brought that to the leadership of those.
So maybe that would go back to the earlier question, something you learned in office, that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, did you learn that it was possible to go 100% in on your responsibility for oversight without backing off, and also be flexible in a way that you could also make sure the process moves forward?
Absolutely. That was the biggest learning. That was the biggest learning curve, for sure.
Yeah, Darryl Brackeen Jr., Alder Ward 26, running for re-election November 4th against the fellow millennial, Josh Van Hoosen. You're 33, he's 31. You both talked about tech. And millennials aren't even the younger generation anymore.
We're old now.
What do you call my kids' generation? Oh, that's my kids your age. What do you call the next generation? I forget. Is it
good question?
Z? I sound like such an old fogey. You shouldn't be sounding like this because you're only 33 years old. But in any case, the boomers have screwed things up, right? In the sense that we don't move aside. right? Not we still can contribute. It's not like we should put us in an old age home and we still can like function. But like leadership needs to change hands by generation. And like I'm not going to go into Secretary of State's race, but very few state offices open. So every time it does, there's like this flood of people going for it because there's so few positions available to young leadership. We're trying to keep them in Connecticut. I want to ask you about that because you're in one of these races where you have two millennials who very much identify about like new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things. Tell me about your identification that you actually started a group called Generation Change Connecticut. It's about voting participation, voting rights, electoral reform, election security. You promote that stuff. Now, that's as old as Reconstruction and before. You've even told that story about, I guess, a great-great-grandfather getting the right to vote in the South after being a slave. That was a moving story, and when we do Secretary of State, I'm going to ask you to tell that in length. But, so what makes that generation change? How's that a millennial issue?
Yeah, I just really, after being told to kind of sit back and wait your turn, when
I don't mean Secretary of State, I meant like
I was literally told that when I first ran for Alder. So yeah, I'm reflecting now. So it sounds very similar, but it's really still a reality.
And you can understand us all boomers. We don't want to feel like we're useless, and we don't want to admit that we can't. Like I have people half my age who are like so much faster than I am. Yesterday I was working a story. I have a reporter who's like 30 years younger than I am, and I read this report and I said, "Here's what I think the story is." He had read the same report and noticed that I missed like the complete story.
Yes.
He's just like much more focused. He's quicker on doing stuff. He understands better. And it's a tough thing, people our age. We got to understand how, while we continue to contribute, that we have to understand that we're not at the prime anymore and that there have to be opportunities for millennials and Z.
But you know what, Paul? There's another narrative to this too. I feel like the baby boomer generation was the group of individuals that encouraged me to run. Literally, my leadership team, the entire work committee, actually, it's been recently that I've been able to successfully recruit more millennials to join.
One of your co-chairs is Baby Boomer, but not
Generation X, sorry.
Yeah.
But still,
not all about X.
Still represented. Like, actually, the baby boomers are the majority of my ward committee. If it wasn't for them, I know I would not be here. So
tell me about Generation Change. Why'd you call it Generation Change, and what's the role of millennials there? We don't have to dump on baby boomers. That's another story.
Now we're kind of entering into the bigger problem that I know my opponent often likes to talk about, which is, here's something else I've learned. We can't effectively change a lot of the things here in the local level without addressing what's happening at the state level. And as a voting rights advocate, as somebody that's been doing this work locally and nationally, most recently on the Biden campaign, of which I'm so grateful that I was able to come here and talk about my experiences there. This past year, upon the pandemic, we realized a lot of things really needed to be addressed in terms of access to the polls. So I was working with City Town Clerk Michael Smart during the pandemic to figure out how we can address providing more access, and one of the things that came up was literally having the physical absentee ballot boxes. Now, I realized that I couldn't just go up to the state legislature without having some sort of support that shows statewide we need practical results for real issues that people are facing during this pandemic, and that's kind of was the driving effort to the start of Generation Change Connecticut. A coalition statewide came together and said, look, we need to come together, work together on trying to figure out how we legislatively address a lot of the issues.
And you're also president of the Urban League of Southern Connecticut Young Professionals. You're still president?
That is correct.
What's that all about?
So, well, the Urban League is a historic civil rights institution, and the young professionals work to support the institution as itself around economic development, service, and advocacy around voting rights in particular. The young professionals, my role is to try to provide young professionals the opportunity to develop small businesses and have the access and make the connections and the networks to help support that. 2, provide workforce job opportunities. That's something that the Urban League provides, but our job is to kind of promote that these services are available. And lastly, a network. Look, Paul, the fact of the matter is, in many urban settings, we understand that if you did not attend a Yale University or a Harvard or whatever, the network, you have to build it yourself. So it's the job of the young professionals to provide a network opportunity for young people to leverage, to ask questions, to build their portfolio, and to expand the opportunities and get the access.
So ward committees, government bodies, civic groups like the Urban League, unions, that's sort of you see as group ways that we nurture new leadership.
Yes.
We're talking about that on Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM. We're with Darryl J. Brackeen Jr. running for re-election, Ward 26. Sorry, I'm going to try not to write that in the article.
Oh, what's happening in 27? Huh?
So, this I am interested in this idea about groups. So, obviously in New Haven, Democrats want to make the Republican Party an issue because it's the Republican Party. They're running people for the first time. You got to be one of the lucky ones to have someone run against you, which I actually think is a lucky thing.
Well, it's actually not. So this is not my first time. I actually have had a Republican opponent run against me since the day that I had decided to ever run.
But now there are 5 in town that hasn't happened, and a mayoral candidate. And they are not talking the Trump line, but they're not talking the Trump line except for your candidate. Your candidate said never Trumper. But, in general, like their city clerk person saying we want more drop boxes was very much against what the party stood for statewide and nationally. And the role of party is interesting here. And I want to think about it for a second here without taking sides. So I went to this very impressive meeting you had on Sunday in the backyard of Edward Joyner, who's the Board Ed candidate, Ward 26. You had a ward committee and you had 40 people there. And people were getting their list of streets, as you said earlier, to go knock on every door, see who's with you, get out the word about voting. You had a team of candidates at the place. It was team politics. And you are very comfortable with being a Democrat. You were a delegate, if I'm not mistaken, for Joe Biden. Right. You are very much feeling good about the national, state, and local Democratic Party. And your campaign is very much a big team effort. You hit doors, but so do 40 other people.
That's right.
Your opponent, and again, I promise, I'm not saying this is a pro-con in any way. Your opponent is very much an individualist. Like he loves civic engagement. He's very big on elections. He volunteers at the polls on election day. He quit the state central committee of the Republicans because of what they did about the January 6th election and because of the police brutality positions in race. But he very much is comfortable being a Republican. He said the Republican Party had values that he stood for his whole life about government being a last resort often and like better systems and, pro-environment in the old days. And he feels he should stay in there and fight for what he thinks the party is rather than the kind of crazy turn it's taken. But he doesn't have a team. He's the one knocking on the doors. There's nobody but Joshua Van Hoosen knocking on doors for your opponent's campaign. He has some people giving him some help with ideas, but it's really an individualistic campaign. And again, I'm not saying one is better or not, but he's not comfortable with that party label. But, your generation, Darryl, and the next generation even more, is very skeptical of groups, as you know. Largest group of politics of voters, not New Haven, but in Connecticut, is unaffiliated. It's not Democratic, although they vote for Democratic congressmen. In society, participation in ward committees, you're an anomaly in Ward 26. Most of New Haven is not like that. A few places are. People are skeptical of groups. And there are pros and cons of that. They didn't like the old party machines. They thought backroom deals. But now people say, well, now there's not a consensus around a set of ideas where you come up with ideas with your neighbors who you might not agree with. Are you out of step by being an old school group person? Old school. Right? You are old school. You're new school and being a millennial, right? The issues you have, the networks you've developed. But you're doing an old school thing, which is to run with a team. To just proudly say, not say I hate Nancy Pelosi in order to get some tested, voter approach that's in some congressional districts. You're saying, I'm proud to be Democrat. I'm proud of Biden. I'm proud of my committee. I have people knocking on doors with me. When you're electing me, you're electing this team. And your opponent, who's a very intelligent guy and very well intentioned, he said, I'm not comfortable with the team. He's not even running with the local Republican team. He says they're good people, but I don't agree with some stuff they're saying. I think it's important to stand for a set of values you have and bring a fresh kind of independent look. Because, and he didn't say it this way, but the generation has, saying our institutions and groups have failed us. Who's right about the direction of our politics?
Actually, I'm not interested in figuring out who's right or who's wrong about his individual life's
larger
progression.
Question of running as a group, running as a loyal Democrat, loyal party person, running with a team.
Well, I'm running with the team that endorsed me. And I would never, in any way, shape, or form, try to go for a Republican endorsement. I think actually, let me just say, I'm glad my opponent is civically involved, but he's very much out of touch if he thinks that this Republican Party is going to change. So in all fairness, if we're talking about the city of New Haven, And in the context of City of New Haven, in the context of Ward 26, it is the Democratic Party that is the leadership of the neighborhood. I'm speaking very specifically to Ward 26. So I hear the bigger philosophy and would actually love to engage with that conversation in a different context, because I actually do have an opinion about what I'm going to call the new Democratic Party. I actually do believe there has been an insurgence of progressive values that have been infused into the structure of the Democratic Party. It is not all one team. And I can.
But that's always been true from time immemorial, and we're seeing that obviously with the Building Back Better and the reconciliation bill.
Right.
But you did something interesting that I actually learned from, not from Darryl Brackeen, from what happened in that presidential election.
Yes.
Which is that people who say they agree with the progressive wing were quite comfortable with Biden, because they also believe that you compromise as a bigger group for the goal. And in the end, Biden did move quite a bit with the progressive agenda, even though he ran against the progressive candidates as the moderate. So that's the kind of point I'm trying to figure out. Because when I was younger, when I was a millennial, when I was 20s and 30s, I was always against the Democratic machine. And I think I had good points. I wrote a lot about the corruption. There was corruption, and that was wrong. But now when I look back at how I tore down institutions, I think I was wrong about some things, which is that we do need institutions. You need to do the messy, long meetings, which I can never sit through, so therefore I admire the people I write about because they can sit through them. You know, that there's also value in it. And that those are important tensions on both sides. I think you do need the people on the outside with AOC, saying, this hasn't worked.
Yeah.
But that you also need people who don't agree with each other to be able to compromise and work those things out.
I strongly agree. And historically in America, that is democracy. It is quite messy. And it always feels like the worst time because we're presently in the worst time.
But it's not.
Politically, it feels that way. But believe me, there have been really oppressive times politically in both parties over the arc of American history.
But I mean, the things that happened in New Haven before are really different from now. So when we talk machine now, so they just don't have the power because there's a new general ethos of what's okay and what's not. The same people now who are following all sorts of new laws in the old days would have, with the best of intentions, given out corrupt contracts and not feeling it was corrupt if they weren't taking the money. Or the city budget director used to send out fundraising demands, not appeals, on city stationery to the people who he gave contracts to or hired and said, here's the amount you're donating, here's the envelope.
Right.
But that person wasn't taking the money. And I thought it was terrible. We wrote about it and the person got fired. But I mean, he was a good guy. If he were working today, he wouldn't be doing that. So I actually haven't resolved this question in my mind, Darryl. It's I do believe you need groups. And I do think you need pressure on those groups. But I'm going back to thinking of John Golden. I'm thinking back in the day, Arthur Barberi.
Yes.
So they're in a back room. If you wanted any job, he had to say okay. And that was a very undemocratic process. And you had to, it would involve him making money. The reason he became a very wealthy on contracts for cable TV that he didn't give any value to. He got them through as a price. But he also had every ethnic group at the table. But the members of the ethnic groups that got the jobs were ones who were loyal to the machine, so they would vote against the interests of their ward on citywide issues to get that. So I'm trying to tease this out. I feel less confident about this question now than I did in the last century when I was short. When I was your age, I was a lot more sure of things.
Well, it sounds like you got a book in the making here.
No one would read it, believe me. Can you imagine how bored they are now? But then to bring it back to reality. So you're comfortable. Yeah. Team D.
In the context of Ward 26, I absolutely appreciate the team that I've built over the last 8 years. And they just all happen to be Democrats. Now, I should also add that there are a wealth of independents and Republicans that actually do support me within the ward context as well. So, like I said, all politics are local. And if I've been effective in getting things done on the streets, the lights, the sidewalks, and the issues that the residents care about in my ward, that's who I represent, and that's who I'll carry it forward. Doesn't matter what the title is.
Okay, the risk of going into the twilight zone again. I think you're right that 2021, October, politics is still local in New Haven.
That's right.
I do think in all the races, people care most about streets and sidewalks and the schools and if they get shot.
Right. That's right.
But, and Tip O'Neill, the former House Speaker, had that famous statement, all politics is local. I would argue that is changing very fast. In Guilford, all politics is not local. The school board is about this crazy critical race theory that isn't even being taught. No one even understands what it is. Has nothing to do with the Board of Ed in Guilford. It has to do with, like, some white people don't want to have to talk about race ever in the history of slavery. But, you know, in Brantford, the reason they need armed guards for Republican members of the school board is because they might get attacked by crazy Trumpies for wanting to save kids' lives with masks. So I think it's fair. And the Virginia race for governor isn't even local to Virginia. That's all about whether Trump loses your votes or Biden loses your votes. Do you think you're going to be able to, the person who runs for Alder in Ward 26 in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years is still going to believe that repaving Vista Terrace is even relevant to whether they'd win the election?
Interesting question. And I think we can reflect on that 2 to 4 years from now. I know in this present moment that the priorities that are being presented to me at this moment are very local concerns. Obviously, it's all in the context of larger national conversations that I'll be glad to come back and talk about.
And they're not even quality conversations, really. Because we love those national conversations about how best to do infrastructures, fix the lead water, whether stimulus works or doesn't work, whether debt, it can be okay, and the Keynesian economics can come back. It's really about this kind of cult stuff, sometimes on both sides, about good guys and bad guys. But I see it seeping locally so fast, and it's creeping at our door.
Now, the one thing I will acknowledge, as I have canvassed the ward, it's hard for a lot of the residents not to mention their
Well, actually,
concern.
you mentioned it on Sunday. You said the Republican Party is trying to get a toehold in New Haven and we can't do it. So it's your opponent who said, I don't want to get it back and forth with your opponent, but he said it's not about the Republican Party. The Republican Party citywide is saying, stop talking about Trump, stop talking about National Republican, judge us basis on what we're saying here.
Well, then I would say that my opponent's not paying attention to what the residents actually are concerned about in terms of the context of their home. Literally, as I've gone door to door, after we talk about the bread and butter issues, as I'm beginning to run away, the last conversation I can remember is a sigh and just like, but what's going to happen, nationally? And they would name their concern or their issue. Oh, what's going to happen in 2024, Darryl?
And you are asking people to support you because you're a Democrat partly.
Well, I'm asking people to
okay.
support me on the ambitions and the platform and the results that I've delivered.
There's nothing wrong with saying you're proud to be a Democrat. I'm saying
I've said that loud and proud. Like I said, I've been a delegate to the National Democratic Convention. I'm a proud Democrat for sure, but you'd be hard pressed to not hear a resident who is an active voter that's not concerned with all the things that you actually namely
was that as true in 2011 and 2013 when you first campaigned?
I don't think so. There's an anxiety actually. Actually, I'll name it. There's a bit of an anxiety about how the national politics can impact the local results.
Like if we have fascism and Trump comes back.
You said it. You said that.
I mean, I'm respecting the request by the Republican Party here that if they're not going to talk about Trump, we won't. Because that is toxic. I mean, that for some of us is existential.
But if the residents are concerned about it, it has to be talked about. And I'm reinforcing that I am the best representative of the neighborhood because I understand that that's their major concern.
Jawan Carter, several gaps need to be bridged within the political and community spaces. Thanks for listening, Jawan. Before we let you go, tell me about the American Rescue Plan. How do you want to see the money spent, and taking total unfair advantage of my position of having the mic? What do you think about fiber optic?
Yeah, well, actually, I've been day one of my aldermanic role, I was appointed to working towards trying to expand Wi-Fi.
And my understanding is that because it happened in hundreds of other communities since then. In New Haven, it failed twice. My understanding, one of it was Union, that Frontier. So everywhere in America, there's an oligopoly. Phone companies and cable companies want to force people to get really slow internet that never works for twice or three times the price of fiber optic by using their political influence to stop government from allowing it to happen. So that failed in Chattanooga, it failed in Weston. But so here, Frontier got the communications worker to convince Alders to kill the plan because they said we're going to lose jobs. And then the second time, I guess there was an investor from Singapore, and they got spooked by the Donald Trump election, so they didn't invest. I mean, what's your take on why we haven't gotten fiber optic? You've been seeing it close.
I I am not the mayor who would be really in charge of implementing, though the Board of Alders would have a say in terms of the approval of the allocation of the funds. I'm saying that I've been a consistent voter and supporter of the allocation of funds towards expansion.
What do you think about the rescue plan? Because you have to make choices, right?
Yes.
You can't give it to everything.
So actually, this is the one time that ARPA, one of the larger grants, is not coming through my committee. It's going directly through the Finance Committee. And there are pieces of that grant that gets filtered to.
And actually, fiber optic wouldn't come to your committee.
It would not.
So what do you want to see on, instead of taking my priorities here? What's your priorities for?
My highest priority, I would like to actually see a large allocation of funds go towards asthma activities. There is an item
about that.
There's an item that's been proposed to my committee through a community group of individuals that held and hosted a debate a few months ago with Mayor Elliker and the Hamden mayors a few months ago, Connect. They're proposing allocating about $12 million towards the health department to increase activities around addressing asthma and health disparity issues in communities of need. While the details haven't been fleshed out totally, none of the details have been fleshed out totally on how ARPA will be spent. So
ARPA being Mega Rescue Plan?
Oh, that's right.
That's where the A comes from second, the ACT? ARPA?
Yes.
Okay. I always thought it was ARP.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really all open season. I will say I am slightly concerned about the recent proposal concerning the influx towards security cameras and not necessarily the infrastructure of community policing. That is something that I have heard on the doors kind of come up, and I'd like to explore that further. What
would it mean? Community policing has come to mean a lot of things.
Yes.
Back in the day, late 80s, early 90s, it meant do small problems and fix those before they become big problems, and do it with the whole community, not just the cops.
Right.
So broken windows there, people can say, oh, now I can do bigger things. Became two very different ideas. Giuliani was arrest the squeegee guy, arrest the little person. In our city, it was that makes the problem worse. So we stopped arresting as many people. We worked with child shrinks from Yale to help kids seeing violence. We got mattresses for kids to jump on. Trampolines instead of bothering the wino on the corner. But now it's got a lot of different places.
Right.
When you say community policing, what do you mean?
I literally mean communities driving the conversation of how policing should be addressed in the communities that they live and reside. I strongly believe that a lot of what we're facing in terms of the violence in the city, it's stemming from many wraparound issues that really do need to be addressed. And I think the ARPA funding needs to go around towards addressing those wraparound issues.
But do you mean, because there's a big debate about walking beats. It always meant walking beats. When you guys first got elected, your team here on the board, we got more walking beats because you guys. Other people say, given the new budget changes, the new use of technology, but you have weighed in on this, you think it's not a substitute camera for a person. Right. Some people are saying, you can't just have them walking. It's not efficient, but get out of the car while you're driving, but do new kinds of techniques. So it is kind of an open question. Other people say. It is.
It's very much.
So where do you want to see the money flowing specifically?
Yeah, I actually would like to see the community have more say in terms of how to develop what the plan looks like. Oftentimes we see a top-down approach to how funds are used, and the residents often feel like they're left out of the conversation. So I'm actually really advocating for more community opportunities to weigh in on the specifics of the plans that they need for their actual neighborhoods.
There are a lot of work to do. If Darryl J. Brackeen Jr. is reelected this Tuesday, I'll have a chance to continue doing that as the Alder for Ward 26. Whoever you're going to vote for, please try to make it to the polls Tuesday. If you need to vote absentee, you can go down to the city clerk this Saturday. They're doing open hours. Well, I learned a lot today. I bored you a little bit with old man philosophy, but we got through it. You were polite with the old guy here behind the counter. I want to thank you for joining us. Thanks for the comments, folks. Harry wanted to say that Democrats love crime. To me, that's the kind of statement that doesn't really help the debate much. But do you love crime?
No.
Okay, so you disagree with our station manager, but Harry does a great job as our station manager. Thank you for keeping us on the air, Harry Dross. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.